I began this investigation, we found this evidence, and you think once the FBI's on your case, justice will be done. As cliched as it is, and I was naive.
For any kids at home dreaming about being a corrupt businessman, keeping detailed records of the bribes you paid is an absolutely terrible idea.
It is one of the biggest corporate scandals in history.
They were able to build a big case.
Worth over $100 billion.
We had 10 days to actually do something.
Essentially concoct a way to get rid of him.
Cameras captured something that was supposed to stay unseen.
He didn't call his lawyer, he called the FBI to get him out of jail. Now, why would you do that?
Yeah, the pressure was on.
It was the biggest case in serious fraud office's history. They put millions of pounds into it.
Given the weight of evidence of corruption, it's hard not to be overwhelmed by.
Bigger than Enron, Theranos, or Bernie Madoff.
It was an open and shut case.
But unlike those scandals, you've probably never heard of this one. And that is no accident. Welcome to The Great Untold, where we feature great, untold true stories that should be movies or TV series, but aren't yet. So today, one of the world's largest bribery scandals in global history. It's got pretty much everything. Whistleblowers, double crosses, subterfuge, code names, the FBI, the DOJ, the Serious Fraud Office, and some of the world's largest companies. It is a great story, so let's get into it. Hopefully, I won't get sued. So why this podcast? Why The Great Untold, you might be asking yourself? Well, let me tell you. So I've worked in television and film for 15, almost 20 years as a writer and as a show creator for some of the biggest networks in the world, for FX and for Fox and for AMC. And for every great true story that gets made, for every Aaron Brockovich, for every Schindler's List, for every Spotlight, 1,000 never see the light of day. And truthfully, it's probably more. It is just that brutal to get a great true story made. Ergo, The Great Untold, because honestly, it breaks my heart. I wanted to be able to share some of these stories that I've come across and share them from the storytellers themselves. So I hope that you enjoy it. If you do, please press like, please press subscribe. That way you'll see more of us. Now, back to the show. So, the company was called Unaoil, a tiny office in Monaco run by two brothers, Cyrus and Salman Ahsani. Their business? Simple. They funneled bribes. How did it work? Well, if you were a big company and you wanted an oil contract in the Middle East, these were the guys that you went to. The brothers would pay out the bribes and you would get the contract. In their 15 plus years, they paid out hundreds of millions in bribes, and in return, their clients got over $100 billion worth of contracts. Their client list included Samsung and Halliburton, Hyundai, Rolls-Royce, and the list goes on. But that is not the fascinating part of this story, because look, we all know that big companies sometimes break the rules, and that is just the way of the world. So is the part where they get away with it. So what makes this TV series material? Well, in this case, Unaoil did get caught, dead to rights. All of them. Hard drives, documents, whistleblowers, and surprise, they still got away with it. But here's what's different. This time, we got to see exactly how they pulled it off, how they evaded justice, how they slipped away. And that story seldom gets told. So here's what happened. A whistleblower, Figaro, approaches a journalist with a hard drive full of evidence. The journalist, who happens to be our guest today, takes the evidence to the Serious Fraud Office, and they assign their toughest prosecutor to the case, a man by the name of Tom Martin. So far, so good. Tom Martin issues warrants, offices are raided, and important people get thrown in jail. And that is when things start to go south. The brothers hire a fixer. Tom Martin gets fired. His boss, who'd assigned Tom to the case, gets retired. As for the brothers, they get a slap on the wrist. And not a single executive from the big companies ever step into a courtroom. And to untangle this mess, this wacky story, we have with us today Nick McKenzie, the investigative journalist who broke the story for the Sydney Morning Herald and the Huffington Post. And to my side, Peter Klein, 3-time Emmy Award-winning producer of CBS 60 Minutes, and more than that, lots more, because Peter was filming a documentary about the scandal when something really remarkable happened. His cameras captured something that was supposed to stay unseen. Now, in real life, these moments seldom happen, but this time it did. And later in the show, we'll tell you all about it. But first, let's start at the beginning. And for that, we go to Nick McKenzie, because Nick, the story really does begin with you and with the whistleblower. So why don't you take it away?
Well, it starts almost like a Hollywood cliche in that I get this anonymous letter in the mail with a bunch of stamps on it. So it seemed like it was sent from overseas. Basically, it said that if you want to to chase the biggest corruption scandal in the world, placed an advertisement in a French newspaper with a code name in the real estate section on this day.
And who does he turn out to be?
Well, he turns out to be one of the most significant deep throats of my career, somebody who actually did have evidence of the world's biggest corruption scandal. This company called Unaoil, this consulting firm in Monaco run by a very, very wealthy family, very well-connected family, the Ahsani family. And this mysterious deep throat, this whistleblower, had information that would drip out initially and then come as a flood. And that information was the way that Unaoil operated was it was effectively the world's biggest bagman or bribe payer. Any company that wanted to access a major oil-producing country, Iraq, Iran, Libya, you name it, it offered this unique service. We can bribe the local officials, the oil ministry, the politicians, whoever you need to bribe. We'll keep your name out of it. You pay us, we'll do the dirty work on the other side. But that was effectively what this whistleblower was telling me was going on.
And he ends up handing you files. You end up getting incriminating files, don't you?
He basically said, there's a trove of information, there's a hard drive with all the emails from this company, Unaoil, which will make clear the bribery and corruption that's going on a grand scale. But it was some time till we got that hard drive, and sure enough, it was the keys to the kingdom.
What kind of dollar figure are we talking about, bribes?
So the bribes were disguised as fake consulting payments. And I mean, one tranche of consulting payments to win a contract in Iraq, I think worth about $1.6 billion. The bribe was around $70 million. It would slice and dice that payment to pay off the officials in Iraq, which we later found out to be a very, very senior politician. But $70 million in bribes, I mean, that's just one deal that Unaoil was involved with. So you times that over many times. And it's not just the quantum of the bribes. I think what came to light after months and then years is the scale of the bribery. Over many, many countries, many jurisdictions, many companies using Unaoil. In fact, it was almost normalized in the oil services industry. You're a big oil major, you want to win a contract. Chances are you've paid Unaoil a consulting fee to grease some palms. All over the world, many bribes over many years. There was one critical email here. The old man Ada, he's got a bad memory. Who's who in the zoo? What do the codes link to? He's forgotten. Lighthouse. That's senior Iraqi oil official, Dear Jafar al-Musawi. Ivan, Odeh al-Qurashi, boom, we understand who Ivan is. So using these code names, we then search across all the emails again and understand who's getting paid bribes and how.
In the documentary, you broke down all those documents that Figaro had given you. The word bribe isn't used in there at all. So how do you decipher it? How do you actually put together something that you can then go ahead with? Because it's a great story.
We had a few 100,000 emails. It's impossible for anyone to read all those emails, obviously. And I remember an Italian journalist saying to me, almost with pity, he's like, Nick, having 1 million files is like having no files at all, as in, good luck, son, there's no way you're going to go through this. But we got some good data, a data mining tool. Now, of course, the first thing you do when you start data mining is you do put in the word BRIBE, bribe, nothing. You put in the word kickback, nothing. Put in the word graft, nothing. And then you go, fuck, what next? But we had a few lucky breaks. Now, if you are running an industrial scale bribery scandal, it's going to appear. It's going to appear in financial transfers. So there'll be a money trail somewhere buried in emails. You'll see funny money moving in terms of weird consulting payments. And there has to be communication as well. And while they tried to do things like communicate on Skype, because of unreliable internet connections, Skype organising it, Skype would fall through, and then they'd have to revert to email. Now, in the emails, they used codes. And we figured out I mean, they weren't great codes. You could tell something fishy was going on. Now, one of the codes was, we'll give somebody a half day off or a full day off. Now, that somebody was an official or a politician. I mean, Unaoil didn't employ them. What were they talking about? And then we could match that half day off with a consulting invoice for $500,000 and a full day off, 1 day off. It'll give them a day's holiday. That was $1 million. So once we knew that, well, a 1 day holiday was $1 million, then we could search the term 1 day holiday or half a day. But one of the critical breakthroughs was they gave their bribe takers code names. And at one point, I think the Ahsani senior, he was quite an elderly man, running the family, running this bribe enterprise, had a senior's moment, an elderly man's moment, and forgot the codes, who was who. And so one of the sons quite helpfully sent an email with just a reminder, Dad, the oil minister we call him the Fox. And so anyhow, we could then crack the codes that way as well. And once you understand the codes, the names, you can lay the whole thing bare with some good data mining, and the picture began to be painted. Mind you, I'm sure we just scraped the surface. I was interested to read the FBI findings were far more holistic and far-reaching than ours, and I think they found bribes paid in was it 12 or 28 different jurisdictions. I mean, they found many bribes paid.
So I could either publish my story, or I could tell the police that I intend to publish a story. Maybe you want to get in there before those shredders start destroying evidence.
Any sensible-minded criminal would destroy probative evidence that would sink their ship.
Tom Martin was instantly aggressive and full of energy.
He basically said, look, you've got 7 days and I'm publishing. It meant that we had 10 days to actually do something. Yeah, the pressure was on.
I remember when Peter first told me about this story a couple of years ago. What I remember you saying is that traditionally what a journalist does is he then goes and he runs with the story. But you didn't do that.
So prior to publication, I went and spoke to the FBI and spoke to the US Department of Justice and spoke to the United Kingdom Serious Fraud Office. And I simply said, well, we are publishing this huge corruption story. So the night before we published, the Serious Fraud Office, in conjunction with the FBI, raided the Monaco headquarters of Unaoil and seized evidence which would later become absolutely critical in the prosecution of Unaoil.
Yeah, I mean, it was a bold move, I think, that Nick took, reaching out to the authorities, and it paid off, because I think he's absolutely right. All that evidence would have been destroyed, and Nick would have had his scoop. It would have had a big story, but it would have been very difficult, I think, for the authorities to build their case. But them actually going in and getting it, and of course they got much more than what Figaro had. They had all sorts of things from the servers, so they were able to build a big case. It was the biggest case in Serious Fraud Office's history. They put millions of pounds into it. They had a 50-person team, and it looked like it was an open and shut case.
Well, to me, there are two great parts of this story. And one is the mechanics of you getting contacted by a whistleblower and then the codes. But then the other side of this is this could have been a massive prosecution with the people responsible going to prison for years. And that's not what happened.
What should have been a great prosecution becomes a great scandal in my mind. And once it knew that it couldn't deny the corruption, the Ahsani family used their power. They shifted tack. They worked out they could game the anti-corruption system that exists around the world. They began to play the FBI off against the UK Serious Fraud Office. So while you've got the FBI making a complaint against Tom Martin, you've also got Tinsley as the whisperer. And who is he whispering to? He's whispering to his old mate, who happens to be the new head of the UK Serious Fraud Office. And once you got the bulldog off the case, then life became easy for the Ahsanis. Tom Martin, he was the one guy who wanted to see this through to the nth degree. He wanted justice to triumph here. He was a dog with a bone. He was a bull in a china shop. I mean, he was all those things you need a cop to be when they're going up against big money, big dirty money. By placing pressure on the Serious Fraud Office through Tinsley, through other Ahsanis and through the FBI, he was removed and he was smeared.
And just for context, Tom Martin was the head of the Serious Fraud Office.
He was the case officer, basically. So
right.
Tom Martin was a decorated case officer. He had nothing but very, very positive commendations and reviews from his bosses. And so he built this case. He was going after the Ahsanis quite aggressively. And as Nick said, they brought this private consultant, former DA agent, in to try to fix things for them. And one of the first things they realized is we got to get rid of this guy Tom Martin, because he's got to be in his bonnet for us, and he wants to throw us in jail. He was saying like 10, 12 years. They essentially concoct a way to get rid of him.
And so effectively they did a couple of things. The first step was how do we play the cops off against each other? And they began to play the FBI off against the UK Serious Fraud Office. And they did that by hiring a former DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration officer in America, who worked for a private intelligence company, I think called Five Stones. And this guy had some great connections in US law enforcement, but more importantly, he had some great connections in UK law enforcement. So he had access to reach in and start to really try to cut deals with the Ahsani family and the authorities in a way that would ultimately shield them from serious punishment. And ultimately, I think it leads to the rich and powerful getting away with their crimes to some extent. Because in the wash-up of all this, the Ahsanis, started out as a bribe-paying, corrupt family and entity, and in the end, they basically got away with most of their ill-gotten gains. And yeah, one of them spent a few days in prison, just under a year. But yeah, in Australia, if you're a poor black person, you steal a Mars bar, you might go to jail for longer. Then the Ahsanis went to jail for perpetrating one of the most significant corruption scandals in global history.
What happens to Tom Martin in this? I obviously it's a loaded question.
They basically work behind the scenes with the FBI, with the Department of Justice, to get Tom Martin kicked off the case under this complete ruse, claiming that he had a verbal altercation with an FBI agent who had gotten into the British records on the case, and he was having a beer with him, and the FBI agent said he called him a quisling, which he probably didn't even know what that meant, a spy, and a C word, cunt, he called him, which, in England is largely a term of endearment as far as I know, but nevertheless. And they got Tom Martin kicked off the case. And with Tom Martin out of the way, they were able to essentially concoct a scheme to get out of British justice.
So now explain to me, somebody, how the U.S. Department of Justice, the FBI, and some fixer for the FBI and a former DEA gets somebody at the Serious Fraud Office in Great Britain fired.
I could pick up there. I mean, basically, this guy behind the scenes, this from Five Stones Intelligence, Tinsley, he's hired by the Ahsanis. He's hired to cause trouble and use his connections to do so, to weaken the case against the Ahsanis. Now, one thing needs to be said clearly. Tom Martin, this detective investigator from the Serious Fraud Office, he wanted to throw the Ahsanis in jail for, he wanted to give them 10 years plus. Serious crimes. He felt he had the evidence. And at the same time, the Ahsanis are trying to cut a deal with the FBI and the US Department of Justice, which will mean they basically avoid serious jail time in their mind. And Tinsley, this ex-law enforcement official, is helping them do that, scurrying behind the scenes. So while you've got the FBI making a complaint against Tom Martin, you've also got Tinsley as the whisperer. And who is he whispering to? He's whispering to his old mate, who happens to be the new head of the UK Serious Fraud Office. And once you got the bulldog off the case, then life became easier for the Ahsanis.
I mean, there's just so much to pick apart here. I mean, I've talked to Tom Martin, and he laughed about it. In a moment when he thought it was funny, he was being pressured to back off, and it wasn't a threat that was going to work against him.
Salman Ahsani was arrested in the airport. You make one call. That's your one get out of jail call. Who are you going to call? Steph Davis. Who's Steph Davis? Well, she was an FBI agent. He didn't call his lawyer. He didn't call his wife. He called the FBI to get him out of jail. Now, why would you do that?
Now, The Great Untold isn't a show about conspiracies. It's really not. It's about great stories. And what happened next in this story is what makes this one so special, because it gave us a rare view behind the veil into how the machine really works and how justice sometimes gets subverted. And like the best of these kinds of holy shit moments, it started completely innocently. Peter was making a documentary, trying to piece together how the Ahsani brothers slipped away without serious prison times. And his cameras caught something they weren't supposed to, a name, Steph Davis. So you're in the Rome airport where Salman Ahsani had been caught and arrested after the arrest warrants were issued. You're interviewing the agents there, the ones who were involved in his detainment. And with that, why don't you guys take it over?
One of the questions was what happened in Italy. There was sort of an important turning point there when there were warrants out. Two of the family members fled. The father went to Iran and one brother went to Lebanon. And the other one was stuck in Monaco and he was figuring out what to do, and he ended up at the Rome airport.
This is Salman Ahsani.
Salman Ahsani, yeah. Salman Ahsani, the younger brother. And he goes to the airport, gives his passport, and this red notice comes up. And Tom gets a notification in England. And Tom's like, great, my plan worked. I mean, I'm going to get these guys. And it's like...
So I just for anybody listening to this who doesn't have the full snapshot of it, the SFO and the FBI raid the offices in Monaco. They get all these papers. They get all these documents. Correct me if I'm wrong. They issue international arrest warrants for the brothers.
And the father.
And the father. They all make a run for it. They catch Salman Ahsani moving through an airport.
Right. He's actually booked a flight to go to Buenos Aires.
To Buenos Aires, because that's where I would go. Because the weather's good and I'm not going to end up in jail. And the Ecuadorian embassy's tied up with Julian Assange. And so...
And there's good German food there.
And so he gets arrested. Salman Ahsani gets arrested at the airport.
Under this British warrant.
Now Steph Davis is not his lawyer.
I mean, Nick and I were like, who's Steph Davis? And he was like, these guys are playboys. Is it mistress? Is it, who is this person? And Nick figured it out.
Well, I actually remember it because it's a classic, sometimes you fall over something in journalism and literally, I think the cameraman was filming this Italian cop and he had the file out. He was making a big song and dance of it. And the name was caught by the camera by accident. I had no idea who it was. All I knew is when Salman Ahsani was arrested in the airport, you make one call. That's your one get out of jail call. Now, who are you going to call? And it was Steph Davis. Who's Steph Davis? Well, she was an FBI agent. So you're right. He didn't call his lawyer. He didn't call his wife. He called the FBI to get him out of jail. Now, why would you do that? And I mean, it became very clear. The FBI was going to shield the Ahsanis. It was going to shield Salman Ahsani and get him to the United States to become a cooperating witness over there and to deal with US law enforcement and blow up the UK case who wanted to get Salman Ahsani to London to face court and be thrown into jail.
And how long after that does Tom Martin's career or position at the SFO start getting difficult?
Tom's career unwinds. I mean, once it's this really pernicious sort of bureaucratic system. Once you're stuck in the crosshair of an internal investigation, whether you're guilty or innocent is stuffed. He was. I think he was suspended. He was smeared, and he was very much a man in limbo, which was problematic because he was the one guy who was going to hold the Ahsanis to account. By getting him out of the way, it smoothed the Ahsanis' path to an easy ride through the US or an easier ride through the US justice system.
Why is it that in the US they're happy to forget the jail time? What's in it for the US that's not in it for the UK government?
So, I mean, there's a cultural difference cultural and legal difference between the U.S. and the U.K. The DOJ is very happy to do what's called deferred prosecution agreements, which is a misnomer. Deferred prosecution sounds like you can go to your daughter's wedding and then afterwards we're going to prosecute you. That's not what it's not deferring it. It's deferring it forever. We're never going to prosecute you. You're going to pay a fine, basically. So these companies, they wanted to get fines from the companies. Up until today, I think they got $1 billion in fines, and there may be more coming. So they're punishing the companies and fining them, and allowing the companies ultimately not to face criminal charges. They just have to pay these fines. And they made a deal with the Ahsanis saying, listen, testify for us, help us get these fines, and we'll let you off, or let you off with a slap on the wrist. And in fact, I'm pretty sure they were going to let them off completely. And then this new team had come in and they took a slightly harder stance. So ultimately, Salman Ahsani ended up spending just under a year in jail. In the UK, they don't do that. They don't do this kind of horse trading. In the UK, it's you did the crime, we're going to prosecute you, you're going to do the time. So they don't have that sort of culture.
Hold on, but wait. That's fun. That's very cute.
So that's the way that they approach it. Whether they achieve that is a separate issue, and the SFO obviously has a long history of not achieving it. But they don't do those kinds of deals. So they couldn't make a deal with Salman Ahsani and say, give us information so we can go after the companies. But the U.S. could. So the U.S. had a huge incentive, $1 billion incentives, to ultimately make this deal with these guys.
And in the U.K., what was the incentive to prosecute? I mean, one of the companies involved in this was Rolls-Royce, a British company, right?
Yeah.
Are they British?
They are British.
I mean, I know historically they're British.
Yeah.
Huge, well-funded British company. I'm sure there are a couple of other companies that were substantial.
There were some very politically connected British companies involved.
So did the heads of any of the companies that were caught in these bribery scandals, Rolls-Royce, Halliburton, Samsung, Hyundai, major names, did any single one of them ever step into court?
No.
Not a single one.
Not a single company, I think, has been held meaningfully to account. Yeah, Rolls-Royce and other companies have paid big fines, hundreds of millions of dollars. But it's a tax. It's a tax absorbed easily by these huge international conglomerates. So there's no real punishment. Ultimately, this story is not about the bad guys copping it. It's about the bad guys getting away. And it's about how big money and big power, sadly, ultimately wins the race, because that whistleblower who was so determined to find justice, right now I can tell you he's as frustrated as he was at day one.
Yeah, no, I'm sure he is. In the documentary in Bribe Inc., Tom Martin says that, and I quote, billions of dollars worth of contracts in the oil industry were involved, maybe as much as $100 billion. The sum total of maybe $100 billion worth of business was consummated for those companies through these bribes. And the companies paid in total maybe $1 billion in fines.
Yeah.
That's not bad. That's a good business model. I've got a question. I don't know if I'm allowed to ask this question. You certainly don't have to answer it. One of the people who got arrested when the warrants were being issued was a fairly prominent, powerful British individual. And he ended up getting arrested and held for some period of time, like maybe overnight, maybe less. And things started turning for the SFO and on Tom Martin soon after that. So does this resonate for either of you?
There was one very politically connected British oil engineering company that was implicated. They ultimately were not indicted. There was no prosecution against them. But the CEO, who is very politically connected and a big donor to conservatives in the UK, was detained. He was taken to a police station, and he made a call, and he was out, and the case largely went away.
Now, what's really interesting here is sort of the meta of this conversation, which is, I don't remember his name. You're not going to mention his name. Nick, if you know his name, I expect you're not going to mention his name, because none of us want to be sued.
That's the huge part of this, is that,
isn't that, yeah.
These powerful people who have deep pockets, as guilty as they may be, as careful as we may be in our reporting and our fact checking, they will routinely go after journalists I mean, Donald Trump went after CBS News, over the most frivolous, meritless complaint, and as well as ABC News, and ultimately settled with them, got millions of dollars. So, if that sets the stage for a chilling effect by these folks. I mean, Nick is a perennial target for not just disinformation campaigns attacking him, as happened with this case, but, threats of lawsuits. I mean, these lawsuits can not only ruin our careers, but they can bankrupt our news organizations. And if you're an independent journalist, God help you.
I mean, Nick, the newspaper you worked for got sued, didn't you?
Well, we've been sued many, many times, I can report, but not for this. And there was something slightly different. There was just lots and lots of threats of lawsuits. So the Ahsanis threatened to take a really extreme legal action against us, and then they got their mates in the Murdoch press to hype up that legal action. There was some reports that it could mean that we had to pay $100 million in damages. Now, it was all bullshit. The lawsuit was never filed. Had it been filed, we would have defeated it. But they used the law, legal threats, but they used PR, nasty PR, to attack and undermine and spin propaganda, misinformation, disinformation. And that's what the corrupt do. And unfortunately, that's not a unique thing. They did it pretty well.
I mean, the question that comes to mind, when I hear all this is here's a case where a random whistleblower decides to step out of the shadows. You called him Figaro. He hands over these crazy documents. He introduces you to a company you've never heard of, Unaoil. 3 people, basically middlemen, running around, moving bribes around the planet. How many other Unaoils are out there that we've never heard of?
Oh, plenty. I mean, I just think what we came across was normalized behavior in the oil industry. And I hate to say it, but I think bribery is just so commonplace, and it's about to become more commonplace because the Trump administration has suspended the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is the one powerful piece of global legislation that was hanging over companies that paid bribes. The US was the global cop with the FCPA, this piece of legislation that would empower US law enforcement to go hunting on the farthest reaches of the planet. That's now suspended. It basically, Trump's given a nod and a wink to companies, US companies, pay bribes, she'll be sweet. And so I think what we uncovered now is going to get even worse. And geez, that's depressing.
Yeah, and look, I mean, Unaoil would still be doing what they're doing, I'm convinced, if it hadn't been for Figaro reaching out to Nick, and Nick having the courage to pursue this story, and his newspaper having the courage to let him to pursue this story. How often do you get a whistleblower who's willing to risk, their livelihood, their reputation, and possibly even their own safety to go up against their bosses? So this was a rare situation. I mean, journalism, we rely on whistleblowers, but we rarely get them. Nick was fortunate that he had someone come forward and he put the time in to interpret 300,000 pages of documents, which I think a lot of journalists would be like, forget it. Like, I got other stories to do. If all those pieces hadn't lined up, I think Unaoil would still be doing what they're doing. And as you say, there are plenty of other Unaoils out there because whistleblowers haven't come forward. And I mean, even before the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act had been suspended, I mean, they're how are they going to find out? There's 2 people involved in a bribe: the person paying the bribe and the person taking it. Neither of those have any incentive to turn on the other, and most of the time they're sophisticated enough to cover up their tracks. One of the ways the Ahsanis got out of having justice is that this DA agent made a deal with the SFO and he said, listen, we're going to get you sort of lower level people who worked at Unaoil. Where
are the Ahsani brothers today? How have they done? Did they survive their time in, with the justice system?
Yeah, I think they're cruising around in polo shirts and boat shoes in Monaco. I know people have bumped into them there, chins held high. Yeah, I'd like to think that they regret their actions. I'm not so sure they do. I mean, they're much wealthier than anyone listening to this will ever be. They kept the bulk of their loot, of their money.
How much was that? Like, what are they worth?
200 million plus, yeah. I mean, I think they're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's what we know about. We know they had offshore bank accounts.
It's insane. And Tom Martin he's alive and well.
Yeah, Tom Martin's alive and well. I mean, he lost his job, he was fired. One of the ways that the Ahsanis got out of justice served in the UK is that this DA agent, Tinsley, made a deal with the SFO, and he said, listen, we're going to get you sort of lower level people who worked at Unaoil, the country manager for Iraq, etc. So there are these 4 guys, and they helped him build a case against them. They, 3 of them were convicted, and it turned out that Tinsley was talking to the head of the SFO. None of those conversations were memorialized in any way. There were text chains between them, very friendly, kind of flirtatious text chains between them. None of that information was ever given over to the defense of those three guys who ultimately got convicted. So that's, in the U.S. we call it exculpatory. It's discovery. That has to be handed over. It wasn't handed over. So those cases ultimately fell apart. So those 3 guys were convicted, went to prison, but then quickly were released because of the cases fell apart. There was two parliamentary hearings in which
was there a white paper? Was there a white paper? Because nothing happened. I mean, without a white paper, we know there's not going to be change, right? I mean, maybe it's different in Australia. Maybe it's a different color paper. But was there some kind of a decision of outrage issued before nothing else happened?
No, there was just, people on MPs beating their fists. And the Justice Commission called the head of the SFO before, and they basically reprimanded her. And they said, what were you thinking? But, her term wasn't renewed. But she finished her term. She wasn't laid off or anything. She finished her term. And
and not to put too fine a point on it, Tom Martin is relieved from his job for doing his job,
right,
because the FBI and the Department of Justice pressure him out. Lisa Osofsky, who's the head of SFO, goes along with this, has him ousted, keeps her job, and she's just not renewed.
She's just not renewed. But I mean, look, ultimately,
I just want to understand that I'm not drawing any conclusions.
Yeah, no,
if you're my attorney, who's made a point of telling me to try not to get sued, I'm not inferring anything.
Yeah, you're just stating facts. And the other fact is that Tom Martin has a reputation of being an aggressive, professional prosecutor. What do you think Tom Martin's going to do? Just say, okay, I'll do something else. I'll garden. No, of course he then sued them, and he made the case and made the case very well that he was fired under false pretenses, and the Labor Tribunal ultimately exonerated him.
Yeah,
awarded him £300,000 and offered essentially to bring him back to the SFO if he wanted to.
So Tom was completely vindicated in the end. Completely vindicated in the end.
And in fact, the FBI agent who he so terribly offended by, calling him a bad word, testified on Tom Martin's behalf.
How much of this is, besides the world is corrupt, everybody knows the world is corrupt, and big money people don't usually do time. We all know this. There are a couple of interesting things that I just wanted to sort of touch on. If you're a prosecutor, a U.S. Attorney General in the States, and you go after the big guys, they've gone after Trump, they've gone after other people, they don't get fired.
Yeah, they do.
Do they?
And Trump just fired everybody who went after him. He literally got rid of every single person who ever went after him. So.
Oh, sure. Contradict me. But
yeah, I'm not saying that's the right way to do it. But I think certainly not normal course of action.
Well, no, that it's not a normal course of action. But I guess what I was trying to get to, and maybe I'm just flat out wrong, and it sounds like I might be, but definitely not a first. But in the U.S., aggressive prosecution by a U.S. Attorney General gets you a governorship, a run at a U.S. Senate seat. It gets you promoted. It gets you more visibility. In the United Kingdom, if you're an aggressive prosecutor and you piss off people, where are you going? What is there an upside to that career path?
No, I think that's a good point. In the U.S., there is a culture of trying, at least within the Department of Justice, to have some separation. So to not allow that kind of political influence. So if, a friend of the mayor is indicted, the mayor doesn't come to the DA and say, listen, let my friend off. I mean, it may happen, but it is considered unbelievably inappropriate and illegal. To your point, I mean, ultimately you're right, that it's not typical that somebody would be afraid to go after someone because of political pressure.
And here in the UK, it's a career killer.
It can be.
It can be a career killer. I guess my last two big questions, one for each of you, is Nick, you're a highly respected investigative journalist, not just in Australia. So how has this changed or informed what you're doing, or has it? Or you just keep going like, dog with a bone?
Oh, listen, it's definitely made me more cynical, because I think when I began this investigation, we found this evidence, and you think once the FBI is on your case, justice will be done. As cliched as it is, and I was naive. But I thought, given the weight of evidence of corruption, of blatant corruption, that justice would be done. And I think for me, it does leave a really bad taste in my mouth. I am really cynical. It's hard not to be overwhelmed by cynicism, except to say this. While there's journalism out there digging away and working in the shadows, trying to find information the public deserves to know about, and while we're out there shining a light, at least there's some accountability. And while the Ahsanis didn't do serious jail time, and while they've kept most of their ill-gotten gains, there has been, their conduct has been exposed. And I think hopefully the next Ahsani family will think, they'll think long and hard about paying a bribe. Will they pay it? Probably. Will they be more careful than the Ahsanis? Will they use better codes? Probably. If they get busted, will they seek to cut a deal with prosecutors and investigators to get out of jail card free? Definitely. But is the media as well still floating around casting a light? Yeah, it is, and we'll stay at it.
No, I hear you. And then Peter, you were a producer at CBS 60 Minutes for a long time. How different is it doing this kind of documentary, Bribe Inc., independently? You don't have the legal department. You don't have all of that. Like, how different is it? Because even I worry about getting sued with this silly little podcast.
It is hugely different. The bar is very high. You got to get it right. I don't have a legal department, but I had a lawyer who, pretty much every sentence, every clause, every breath was like, how do you prove that? How do you justify that? It was an exhaustive fact check. But the difference is that there's so many examples of this. There's a new book by David Enright that addresses all, this sort of whole culture of companies like Clare Locke, which is a big law firm in the States that's really made an industry of these, libel claims. They got $750 million from Fox News for basically incorrectly claiming that Dominion voting systems had faked voting results. They often go after. Well, they'll go with. I don't want them to sue me. So they'll go. Anyone who's paying them, they'll go after them. They'll represent them, and sometimes those claims are legitimate. But very often, what ends up happening is these aggressive law firms go after people just to silence them, just to scare them. And if you're an independent producer, you don't have the deep pockets. And a lot of stories don't get done because people are afraid to do them. You look at the Scientologists, years and years and years of journalists were afraid to report on the Scientologists because the Scientologists had this history of suing.
And the irony here is we're doing this story about Unaoil and all these massive companies, and I'm going to end up getting sued by the Scientologists. Thanks. On that note, Nick McKenzie, Peter Klein, thanks so much for being here. It's a wonderful film. Bribe Inc. is touring the planet.
The planet. Yeah.
The planet.
And last but not least, thank you. If you like what you've seen, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, And that is really the only way that we're going to grow this channel. And it's, like I said, the greatest way of influencing the algorithm, so you actually get more of this kind of content and less of the weird random stuff that, just turns up. And if you've got a story of your own, we really welcome it. We're always looking for great stories. There's an email contact down there somewhere. I don't know where down there is, but please let us know. Drop us a line. All right, until next time. Thank you.